So now we know that the Bretton Woods system created the first global financial order and solidified America as the dominant economic superpower. This was a great situation for the US, but like they say, all good things must come to an end. And the Bretton Woods system was no exception. So what in God's name happened? How did this New World Order collapse? Well, would you believe it if I said sometimes people go back on their word? Let's get it. BitSwap is the hottest new way to trade tokens. Crawling all the top decentralized exchanges, BitSwap gets you the very best price and value for your trades. BitSwap is changing the game. Try it now at bitswapdex.io. Welcome to BitBoy Crypto. My name is Ben. Every day I show you how to make money in crypto. If you like money in crypto, then make sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you want even more crypto info, you can follow us on Instagram, for the memes. In this video, we will talk about the Bretton Woods Agreement and how it came to an end, ushering in the current international monetary system, a system that is again failing us, making way for the IMF's next iteration of global management, let's call it. They're calling it the Great Reset, or previously known as Agenda 2030. In case you missed my first video chronicling the rise of the Bretton Woods system, check it out here. Like I said in the last video, the Bretton Woods system could not have worked without the IMF in place to enforce the rules of the Bretton Woods system. The member countries relied on the IMF to bail them out if their value of their currency got too low. They needed this kind of centralized global bank so they could borrow money from it if they needed to adjust their currency's value, but they didn't have the funds to do that themselves. However, the member countries decided against giving the IMF all of the global power that a centralized global bank would have. Instead, they agreed to contribute to a fixed pool of national currencies and gold to be held by the IMF, known as Special Drawing Rights, or SDR for short. Each member country of the Bretton Woods system was then entitled to borrow the amount of SDRs it needed from the IMF. The IMF can allocate SDRs to member countries based on that country's standing and ranking within the organization, kind of like a monetary Olympics. That standing and ranking are based on a country's contribution to its share of the global economy. So the Bretton Woods system functioned well for a time, but like I said in the first video, about 3 decades after it was established, it collapsed. So what happened? Fast forward to 1960. The US had about $19.4 billion in gold reserves. This included the $1.6 billion held by the International Monetary Fund. This was more than enough to cover the outstanding balance of foreign dollars, approximately $18.7 billion at the time. This allowed the US economy to prosper. Americans were buying more and more imported goods, and they were paying for these imported goods in US dollars. This created quite a large deficit, and countries that traded with the US were worried that the US would eventually decide to no longer back the US dollar with gold. On top of this, the Soviet Union had emerged as one of the world's largest oil producers. The Soviet Union was stockpiling US dollars in its foreign reserves to sustain their oil production, because the US dollar is the international reserve currency, and thus oil is priced in dollars. The Soviet Union feared that the US would seize their bank accounts as a destabilization technique of the Cold War. As a result, the Soviet Union instead deposited their US dollars in European banks. Then in 1971, the US was suddenly suffering from massive stagflation. For those of you not familiar with this term, stagflation is defined as a persistent high inflation combined with high unemployment and stagnant demand in a country's economy. This led to low economic growth for the US and a decline in the value of the US dollar as a result of too much currency in circulation. The massive stockpile of gold that the US held started to get whittled down. Nixon, who was president at the time, introduced economic policies that only further worsened this stagflation. A rising inflation rate reduced the US dollar's value, and as a result, more and more foreign banks instead started redeeming their holdings for gold, not dollars. The US slowly became unable to meet this growing demand for gold over dollars. Now, if you guys want to see a more comprehensive breakdown of how the value of the US dollar declined over time, check out this video I did here. Or if you're interested in seeing how Bitcoin is the best bet against the crashing dollar, check out this video I did here. But back to the story here. Nixon, known as Tricky Dick, tried to fix the situation by closing the gold window, removing the peg of $35 an ounce of gold that was introduced as a result of Bretton Woods, and no longer allowing the Fed to redeem dollars for gold. This destroyed the economic underpinnings of the gold standard and effectively made the gold standard meaningless. Nixon deflated the dollar's value in gold, first to $38 an ounce, then to $42 an ounce. However, just like most of Nixon's plans, Watergate, this plan completely backfired and caused a run on the gold reserves in Fort Knox as people tried to redeem their rapidly devaluing dollars for the increasingly valuable gold. Now, what a lot of people don't know is this effectively created fiat currencies all across the world, not just in the United States. This destruction of the gold standard didn't stop with Nixon's resignation. In 1976, then-President Gerald Ford made the decision to decouple the value of the dollar from gold altogether, which had devastating consequences. This caused the price of gold to surge to $120 an ounce, the highest price in history at the time, effectively ended the Bretton Woods system as we know it. Even though it was relatively short-lived, the Bretton Woods system should be considered a success. After World War II, the global economy was in somewhat of a desperate situation, and as a result of Bretton Woods, had a pretty solid recovery. It established the U.S. as the dominant economic superpower, which was really good for us, obviously, and the economic growth rates for the member countries ended up being quite high, with economic volatility quite low. Perhaps this wasn't entirely a result of the Bretton Woods Agreement, but it definitely played a role. And at the very least, the Bretton Woods Agreement didn't hurt the situation, that's for sure. However, with all of that being said, even though Bretton Woods was a good system for its time, it was a system that was completely unsustainable. That's obvious now, mainly because those fixed exchange rates were in direct opposition to market speculation, and perhaps more importantly, because it relied on the US being the dominant economic superpower, which over time, a lot of other countries, member countries and otherwise, were obviously not willing to accept. Even though the Bretton Woods system didn't last, it set the precedent and the standard for a global financial order that benefited the rich countries that were members. Natural greed is a powerful driving force, and it would only make sense that because of the success of the Bretton Woods system, a new system would eventually rise in its place. Well, we are now on the precipice of this new system, a system called the Great Reset, created by the IMF, taking pages out of the Bretton Woods playbook. The Great Reset will usher in a new era of global financial order. The only question this time is, who is going to end up on top? More importantly, who's going to be the bottom? So, you want to learn all about the Great Reset and what it means for the new global financial order? If you do, check out the next video in this series. We'll go over what the Great Reset is and what it means for all of us. So that's it for this video. What do you guys think? Was the fall of the Bretton Woods system inevitable because it was too focused on the US being on top? Or was our movement away from the gold standard the kiss of death for this system that put the US in charge? Drop me a comment down below. That's all I got. Be blessed. BitBoy out.